Your dog has already made a decision about someone before you even shake their hand, before you finish saying hello, before you consciously notice anything at all. Because while you're still processing faces and words, your dog is already analyzing patterns. And this is an instinct in the way most people think. It's not magic. It's not a sixth sense. It's something far more precise, far more fascinating, and far more grounded in science. We've all seen this moment. You're walking your dog through a quiet street, maybe early morning or late evening. Everything feels normal, and then someone approaches, and suddenly the same dog who happily greets strangers every day changes. Their posture stiffens, their ears rise, their focus locks in. Sometimes there's that low, controlled growl, not loud, not chaotic, but intentional, almost like a signal, and you pause. Because something about your dog's reaction feels different, more calculated, and the question comes naturally. What does your dog know that you don't? Because for years people explain this as instinct, but modern animal behavior research shows something deeper. Because your dog isn't guessing. It's running a biological evaluation system in real time, constantly scanning, comparing, and predicting human behavior before you consciously process it. A researcher at Kyoto University demonstrated this with a simple but powerful experiment. She pointed at a container and the dog followed. There was food, trust was built, the signal worked, then she repeated it, pointed again, but this time the container was empty and something changed internally. And then on the third attempt she pointed again. This time the food was actually there. Everything looked exactly the same gesture, the same environment. But the dog didn't move. It paused, looked at her, looked at the container, and chose not to trust her anymore. And this wasn't random. 34 dogs went through this exact setup, and every single one made the same decision. They stopped trusting the human after just one broken signal. And that moment reveals something critical. Your dog isn't blindly obedient. It's evaluating reliability, forming a judgment, updating it instantly, almost like assigning a trust score to every human it encounters. And once that score drops, behavior changes immediately. Now imagine this outside a lab. In your everyday life, someone comes to your home. They smile, they speak politely. Everything appears normal, but your dog hesitates, stays slightly back, watches more carefully than usual, not aggressive, just alert. And later you might realize something fell off about that person. Maybe their tone didn't match their body language. Maybe their movements were slightly tense. Maybe their behavior didn't fully align with what they were saying, and your dog picked up on that instantly, not because it understands good or bad, but because it detects inconsistency faster than you can consciously interpret it. And this is where most people misunderstand what's really happening, because the internet reduces it to dogs sense bad energy, but dogs are not sensing energy. They are processing data, and they do it through multiple layers at once. The first being pattern recognition, because your dog is constantly building expectations about how behavior should look, how movement should flow, how interaction should feel. And when something breaks that pattern, even slightly, it creates what scientists call a prediction error. And that immediately triggers attention, which is why small things matter. A delayed reaction, an unnatural pause, forced friendliness, slightly stiff movement. Your dog notices that mismatch instantly, often before your brain even registers it. The second layer is chemistry, and this is where things become even more powerful. Because dogs live in a world of smell, a human has around 5 million scent receptors, while a dog can have up to 300 million, meaning your dog is constantly reading the chemical state of every person it encounters. And when someone is stressed, anxious, fearful, or aggressive, their body releases measurable hormonal changes like cortisol and adrenaline, creating what can be described as a chemical signature. So while you might see a calm person smiling, your dog may be detecting tension underneath, not because it understands morality, but because it detects inconsistency between external behavior and internal state. The third layer is behavioral analysis. Because humans are unique in one key way. We fake emotions. We smile when we're uncomfortable. We act calm when we're tense. We say the right words even when our body tells a different story. But dogs don't rely on the words. They focus on what leaks through: the stiffness and posture, the unnatural stillness, the lack of genuine facial engagement, the tension in movement. The way someone holds eye contact just a little too long. Because in the animal world, direct staring is a threat, and when behavior doesn't align naturally, your dog flags it instantly. The fourth layer is social intelligence, And this is where dogs become even more fascinating, because they don't just observe individuals, they observe relationships, especially how people treat you. And in another study from Kyoto University, dogs watched their owners struggle with a task while a stranger either helped or refused. And later, when both individuals offered food, the dogs avoided the unhelpful person, even rejecting food entirely. And this is important because food is highly valuable to a dog, yet they chose to avoid someone who treated their owner poorly, which shows that dogs are evaluating social behavior, fairness, and trust, not just personal benefit. One of the most powerful real-world patterns supporting this comes from everyday dog owners, where a dog that is friendly with everyone suddenly becomes cautious around one specific individual, not aggressive, not random, but observant and watchful. And later in many of these cases, owners realized there was something off about that person. Sometimes it was nervous behavior, sometimes hidden tension, sometimes inconsistent actions. And what feels like intuition is actually your dog processing multiple signals at once, faster than your conscious awareness. There are also working dog examples that make this even clearer. Trained police and military dogs are able to detect individuals under extreme stress or heightened aggression, not because they understand danger in human sense, but because they detect chemical and behavioral signals like elevated cortisol, controlled tension, and unnatural movement. And while your pet dog isn't trained the same way, it uses the exact same biological system, just at a different level of intensity. Therapy and service dogs provide another powerful example, especially those trained for anxiety or PTSD support. These dogs can detect emotional shifts in their owners before visible symptoms appear, sometimes minutes before a panic attack, simply by sensing subtle changes in breathing, posture, and scent. And if a dog can detect internal emotional changes in someone it knows deeply, it can also detect inconsistencies in someone it doesn't know, which explains why your dog may react differently to strangers depending on how stable or unstable their signals feel. There's also something called negativity bias, where negative signals have a stronger impact than positive ones, meaning one uncomfortable interaction can outweigh many neutral ones. And from an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense, because avoiding danger is more important for survival than rewarding kindness, which is why sometimes your dog reacts strongly to one specific person even if others seem normal. Researchers at the University of Vienna explored an even deeper question. Can dogs distinguish between someone who is wrong and someone who is intentionally deceptive, and controlled experiments? Dogs were more likely to ignore a person who knowingly gave incorrect information compared to someone who was simply mistaken, suggesting that dogs are not just reacting to actions, but are sensitive to patterns of reliability and possibly even intent over time. But it's important to stay grounded, because not every reaction means someone is bad, and not every situation triggers this evaluation. More recent research suggests that context matters. Dogs are far more likely to evaluate behavior when it directly affects them or their owner, meaning your dog isn't constantly judging every stranger it sees, but becomes highly attentive in situations that matter socially. And then there's emotional contagion, one of the most overlooked factors, because your dog is constantly reading you, your tone, your posture, your internal state. And if you feel uneasy, even slightly, your body changes, your scent shifts, your behavior tightens, and your dog picks up on that instantly, which means sometimes your dog isn't reacting to the person alone. It's reacting to the combination of that person and your response to them. So what does all this actually mean? It means your dog is not judging good or bad in a moral sense. It's not making ethical decisions. It's detecting patterns, consistency, predictability, safety. And when something breaks that pattern, your dog responds immediately. And after thousands of years of living alongside humans, dogs have developed a system not magical, not supernatural, but incredibly refined that allows them to navigate human behavior in a way that often feels almost impossible. So the next time your dog pauses before approaching someone, watches them carefully, or quietly chooses to stay close to you instead of engaging, don't ignore it. Because your dog isn't guessing. It's analyzing, it's remembering, it's predicting, and it's deciding based on signals you might not even realize exist. And maybe the real question isn't whether dogs can recognize a bad person, but whether we're paying attention when they try to show us something we were never trained to see.